another quick tie. Your next fly starts here.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another quick tie. My name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bover Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying, and tonight we are bringing you the Swinging Caddis. A very unique pattern. It kind of comes from the spay fishing world or from the swinging world of swinging flies through the water current for trout or for steelhead or salmon or whatever. This one's going to be a little bit more specific to trout as it's in a smaller size and it is somewhat representing a caddis. Now, we're going to be taking you through this in just a few minutes. I do want to thank Western Canada Fly Fishing Guide School for sponsoring this quick tie tonight. You see the information is not there anymore because the class is full. So it is there, but the class is full. Maybe there'll be another one this year, we'll see. But it's full, so it worked. I guess advertising works. Anyways, I'm gonna be tying out of my Season 7 kit. If you've got one, it's gonna look like something like this. If you don't already have one, you can head over to our website. We do still have them available. And even though we're quite a ways through the season, all these quick ties are stored on YouTube, so you can go back through and scan the QR code on each package. It'll take you right to these videos of tying each of these flies. If you aren't tying out of the Season 7 kit and you have one of the individual kits, that's fine as well. The packaging look a little different, but it's gonna be the same materials as we're using for this fly tonight. And if you don't have any of that, you don't have any of our kits, that's fine. As you can see there in front of me, we have a full fly recipe on our website. Head on over, look through the recipe, and you'll be able to follow along, probably with some of the stuff you already have. All right, let's head over to the vise and take a peek at this fly. So this fly is going to be tied on a long shank hook tonight. This is, it is a swinging caddis. It is supposed to somewhat represent a caddis, although in my mind, it probably looks a lot more like a bait fish or something else that's happening in the water system. Doesn't matter. It is a very effective fly, and I really like these caddis versions of it. I find that they work and are very effective. So we do have a few materials to get through on this. It is another soft hackle fly. We've done a few of these this year already. I think we have one to go still. But this is, yeah, very versatile. We're gonna tie it with a bead. It doesn't need to be tied with a bead. You could tie it without if you're gonna go with an unweighted and have some weight on your line. But this bead is it's just a brass gold bead. It's not super heavy, but it will help it get down anyways. So let's go ahead, get this out of the vise, and let's get our next one in. So go ahead and get your bead on your hook. And now in these kits we have, the bead size is a little difficult to get around the bend, so you kind of just gotta work it a bit until you can get it to go around the corner. But I did notice that I was just using a pair of forceps, kind of helped me get it around the bend, and of course this one's not gonna do it for me. But if you can get your nail behind it and get it to turn around the bend of the hook, it should pop through just like that. Then you're gonna go ahead and get this fixed in your vise so it's somewhat level. If you put a little bend in your hook for any reason doing that, just make sure you get it back straight, pull it over, make sure we're good, and level it back out. Now for thread tonight, I'm gonna be using some UTC 70 in black. We do want something a little thinner. Olive would be perfect for this as well. The black is just what I have on hand right now, and it works very well, but you wanna have something a little bit smaller. You're not really gonna see the thread much on this one as we're gonna use dubbing to cover up most of our work. We're gonna go ahead and start our thread just behind the bead. We're gonna start working that rearward, then we'll trim out that tag end, trim it out or break it off. And now I'm gonna take this all the way back to just in front of the point of the hook. Now the first material we're gonna be working with here is some Flashabou. So you're gonna notice in your kit, you actually have some thick Flashabou and some thinner, more fine Flashabou. It is fine to use the thick stuff on this part of it, but I have found that in tying this a few times now, it actually works better to use the thin one. We're gonna double it over, and then we're actually just gonna be leaving it in place as it is a rib over the dubbing as we go forward. So what I'd like you to do is just take a piece of it. I'm gonna fold it over in half so that I have a loop at this end down here, and I'm actually gonna tie in the loop. So I have this little loop, it's sitting like this. I'm gonna make that loop just a touch smaller, set that right up on top of the hook shank, and then I can pull back on it until it slides down to the thread. Get the butt of it secured, and now I'm gonna move my thread rearward. And now I am gonna take this just slightly into the bend, not crazy far down into it, but just slightly. And then I'm gonna bring my thread back forward to just in front of the point of the hook. We're not gonna be wrapping this all the way that far to start with, but it's good to get your thread out of the way in front of that point of the hook, as it is difficult to wrap this stuff around the hook point already as it is. So I'm just gonna start taking some palm ring wraps forward. This is basically, this kind of comes again from like the trout spay world or from the steelheading world, loving to put a little bit of, it's almost like a hot spot at the back of the fly. And you're just using flash to give a little bit of shimmer at the back of the fly. So once I get to here, I'm gonna bring my thread back to where the tie-in is. You can see how my flash separated there. That's fine, because as soon as I put my thread over it, it's gonna gather them together. And I'm just gonna come in here and wrap back over it just slightly so I can secure that slippery material, as this Flashabou is often quite slippery. Now I have 2 pieces still sitting here. I'm gonna go ahead and trim out one nice and close, and I'm gonna leave the other one as I'm gonna use it for the rib on the next portion of this fly. So I just trim out one of them. I've just set that aside for your next fly. And then I still have a piece here I'm gonna rib with. And we are gonna use that Flashabou again to create the wing on the fly, and that's gonna come here shortly. So from here, what we're gonna do is go grab your big clump of dubbing. We're gonna make a dubbing noodle, and we're gonna make a fairly decent sized one. We're gonna create a little bit of a taper, so it'll be a little thinner at the back, and then we're gonna build up bulk as we move forward to the front of the bead. And this is gonna consist of the majority of the body of the fly. So I'm gonna come in here, you can moisten your fingers, use some wax, whatever you find easiest. And I'm just spinning that on with my fingers, rotating them to get that to tighten onto the thread like a rope. That's probably not gonna be quite enough. I'm gonna add just a little bit more. You can always take some off if you need to. This isn't a super precise fly. And this original pattern, the original tire of this one, said multiple times, doesn't need to look pretty. It just needs to work. So don't overthink it, especially with the dubbing or with the hackle that's gonna come at the end. I'm gonna start taking thread wraps back here, just in front of that flash, and I'm just working forward. And imagining in my head that I want a bit of a taper, so if I make a wrap and it looks thinner, I'm gonna maybe double over in that spot until I get a decent taper moving forward. And I want that dubbing to finish kind of just right up behind the bead. If it gets a little loose at the end, tighten it back up. And you don't need to be super tight up against that bead. It looks like it's tight there, but I've still got some space behind the bead, and that space there is gonna be used to put in some other materials. From this point, I'm gonna grab that single piece of Flashabou that I still have attached, and I'm just gonna do nice open spiral. I'm not pulling super tight, but you're gonna see that it's gonna compress that dubbing anyways. We're just gonna work this forward until I get right up behind the bead, and then I'm gonna go ahead and secure that off with a thread wrap behind and in front, and repeat that again, behind and in front. Again, any synthetic material has the tendency to be quite slippery, so we wanna do a little bit of extra thread wraps when securing it, because we don't want it to come out now that we've got it in there. We can trim that tag end out. Now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and grab some goose biots. We got some here dyed brown, like this. I want you to take 2 of them off the stem, so I just separate 2 off so they're together. And what I'm gonna do, instead of tearing them off, because I'm gonna have to cut them anyways, I'm just gonna come in here, don't worry about the length of them, just kind of cut down near the stem somewhere. So I've got 2 pieces sitting here. Now normally we tie these in using the points of the biot. We're not gonna do that tonight. We're actually gonna tie them in reverse. So I'll set one aside. You can tell that they kind of have a bit of a curve to them, okay? Now I'm gonna switch this around in my hand, so that the point is in my fingers and the flat portion is facing back and down the fly. Now I'm gonna make sure that the curve curves away from the fly when I set it on the edge of the fly. We're gonna tie 1 each. These are gonna actually represent the wing butts that haven't quite yet formed, just like this. We are gonna make an angle cut on these in a second. Don't super worry about the length as long as it's back down to near the back of the dubbing. I'm just gonna put some pressure on it right there, and I'm gonna come over and secure it. Now before I go really tight on it, I just wanna make sure that it is on the side of the fly. Doesn't need to be angled any specific way. I just want it to be right down the side of the body. So once I got that in, that's perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my other one, and I'll do the same thing on the near side of the fly. We're just kind of representing that really kind of abrupt wing butt. So that's why we're not gonna use the point, because we want it a little bit thicker. And then I'm gonna trim it to the way I want it. And this one moved a little bit on me, so I'm gonna adjust it before I go really tight with it. Which if you just do a few wraps, you should be able to get it to look something like this before I go really tight. And then you do wanna make sure you get some thread wraps both in front of the 2 butt ends that you tied in and on top. Now from here, I'm gonna trim out the pointed ends. So I'm gonna come in here as close as I can and trim those out on both sides. Just like that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and trim these right away to the length that I want. Now I want them to be just shorter than the overall dubbing that we have on there, so that green dubbing. And I'm gonna cut a downward angle. So I'm gonna come in like this and I'm gonna cut a downward angle on it. So I'm just kind of gauging it off where I can see that dubbing. And I'm gonna trim a downward angle on it like that. I'm gonna take a little bit more off because it's not quite short enough. Just like that. So you can just see the dubbing coming through on the other side. And I'm gonna match this one on this side to be as close in length as the same or as possible. So I'm left with something that looks like this. That's our little wing butts. Now the next thing we're gonna put in here is we're gonna go back to our Flashaboo, and I'm gonna grab that thin one. For sure you do need to use the thin one this time. Okay, so I've got another piece of that. This is a really long one, so I'm just gonna cut it in half. And what I'm gonna do this time is I'm gonna find the midway point on it, and I'm gonna lay that right on top. Now I want to end with two pieces. These are actually gonna be representing the antenna, or could be portions of the wing, depending on how this looks to the fish, but it's supposed to be antenna hanging back off the back of the fly. Again, don't worry about the length, we'll trim it. But I'm gonna place this right on top of the fly. Now I'm gonna take a thread wrap to secure it. I'll take my finger off and I can adjust that a bit to get it to where I want it to go. And then I'm just gonna grab this other end and I'm gonna fold it over and I'm gonna get it locked in as well. And then I'm gonna grab them both and make sure that they're basically right together. They're gonna naturally splay a little bit, but I want them to be right up on top, which they should slide in your thread wrap's not too bad there, just like that. So both of them are right off the top of the hook shank. Now I'm gonna go ahead and trim those right away. So I'm gonna bring this back and I wanna trim them. I'm gonna place my scissors on the back of the hook bend and I'm gonna lay the flash into my scissor and trim. Okay. All right, you can set those aside for the next time. You can use those on the next fly as well. Now, kind of the last thing we gotta do here is we need to put in our hackle feather. So we're gonna create a bit of a soft hackle feather. So you can have a feather that looks something like this in your kit. Now, the key here on this one is there is different ways to tie soft hackles. On this one specifically, this pattern calls for using about half the feather. We don't wanna have an over bulky, so I'll show you a version if I can find it here, because I did tie one just to show you the difference. Of course, I'm not gonna be able to find it on the table now. Oh well, that's fine. Oh, here it is. So using a whole hackle feather, I can get it to look super, super thick and bushy, okay? But this isn't really what this pattern's calling for, because we want to see that detailed work we put in, like the wing butts and the antenna. So we're gonna use half of a feather this time. So I'm gonna come in here and be very careful when you're doing this not to tear the stem, but I'm just gonna start pulling down all of those fibers off one side of the stem. Okay, so I'm just peeling them down. And I want to try to do that right from basically the very tip of the feather. And we're going to tie in the tip itself. Just get those off. Get a few more. You've got to be careful with a delicate feather like this that you're not tearing through the stem, because then the whole feather is going to be kind of useless at that point. Now, I'm going to isolate this, just the very tip to tie in, but I want to tie it in so that the underside of the feather is pointed rearward and back down the fly. Okay, so you can see it kind of has that curve to it. I want the fibers to naturally want to go rearward, and I'm actually going to use some dubbing at the end right behind the bead to force them rearward back over the pattern itself. So now I'm just going to isolate that tip the best that I can. I'm going to come place it right behind the bead, get a thread wrap behind it and in front of it, pull that tight, make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Did that a couple times. So now my stem is in place. I'm gonna come and trim out just the very tip that I had tied in with. Now it's always good to take a couple more thread wraps right here to lock in that butt end so this doesn't slip out when we go to start wrapping it, because that would be a bummer. You're gonna have to start over with a new feather. Now, we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but what I really like to use is a plunger style hackle feather, or sorry, a plunger style hackle grabber like this. Okay, so I'm just gonna come in and grab on the very base of the stem. So I'm gonna use this whole feather because I'm only using half of it. And once I got it locked in there, I'm gonna wrap against the stem that's bare. So right now I can see all the fibers off the top, so I don't want to wrap against them. I wanna wrap against the stem that's bare. So I'm just gonna start wrapping forward, trying to get my wraps to stack behind each wrap. Oh, it slipped out on me, try it again. And this is the hardest thing with hackle feathers and hackle pliers and small hackle feathers is they are often slippery and want to pull out on you. So we want to get the best wraps we can before we lock it down and use up as much of that feather as we can. So I'm being very gentle as I wrap this forward. And it looks like I'm gonna run out right about here. So I'm gonna bring my thread over. The first wrap is gonna be behind to lock that stem in place. And then I'm gonna come over in front of the feather and go again behind. This is to lock in all that work and make sure that nothing comes out on me. Then a couple more securing wraps just behind the bead before I trim this out. And then I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna trim out that stem like so. Good, so this is what we should be left with right now. We've got that hackle feather. You can see some of it's kind of wanting to go forward on us a bit, some of it's going back. But we're gonna encourage it rearward now with just a very small piece of dubbing. We're gonna make another little dubbing noodle. So I'm just gonna take a little wisp off of here, nothing crazy. It's gonna be enough to color the thread and give a little bit of bulk to push this rearward. We can again always add more. I'm gonna try to pull rearward so I can get them encouraged to start backing down the fly. And then I'm just taking some thread wraps with that dubbing on it right there. And now you can see we got basically a perfect orientation of that hackle feather wanting to go back and down the fly. And now all I got to do from here is I'm going to come in and whip finish my fly. So I'm going to grab my whip finisher, come in just behind the bead, do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish, pull that tight. I'm going to do it one more time. It's always a tough thing on patterns where you have dubbing right up against the bead. I don't personally like to put resin on it, except for maybe some Sally Hansen's or something that'll soak in well. UV resin often goes in there and makes that dubbing really hard and crusty, so I try to stay away from it. So that's why I like to do just a double whip finish, make sure I got that nice and solid. And that is our pattern, guys. That's our swinging caddis. Just like that. Hopefully that went well for you and it turned out something like that. There are some fine details in there, but I think those details do matter and it comes through and it gives a really good looking pattern. All right, that's the swinging caddis, guys. Thanks again. My name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bover Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Drop a comment if you're part of the replay squad and this is where you've been getting your content to tie out of your kit. Let us know that. We always appreciate any feedback you can give us. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it and we'll be back for another pattern soon.